Hello and welcome to the Lebanese Politics Podcast. My name is Benjamin Red. I'm joined, as always, by Nizar Hassan. Hey, Nizar, it's great to be back, right?
Yeah, I'm so excited for this. 3 weeks is a long time.
Yeah, we basically took like a Ramadan vacation, and now we're back. Eid is this week, and we're back in the saddle.
Yep.
And we're starting out with, some very light topics this week. We're talking about racism, homophobia, crackdowns on freedom of speech, like the fun topics, right?
Yeah, compared to the other news, maybe that's the lightest.
But don't worry, we'll also get to the budget as well. This week's going to be a little bit weird because we're not going to have like a big main topic just because we were gone for so long that we have so much to cover. So we're going to do sort of like go through everything that we missed or a lot of what we missed and then do sort of like mini deep dives along the way. And the first thing that we have to talk about is, I wasn't joking, racism. What happened in Faraya? And it's still going on in Faraya.
Yeah, another scandal by a Lebanese municipality forcing Syrian residents or workers to have a curfew or stop moving around in the village after a certain time. But Faraya took it to the next level, and they banned Syrian people from being present on the sides of the highway, on the side of the main road of Faraya at any time, day or night.
Yeah. We've seen before cases where municipalities have said, okay, after dark, Syrians aren't allowed to be out. But this is the first like full on, at least that I'm aware of, thing where they say, okay, Syrians, you are not allowed here at all. And it really is incredible. The municipality of Faraya, which by the way is like this sort of posh resort town, is home to like a whole lot of like ski resorts and stuff like that. Some of the best skiing in Lebanon can be found in Faraya. So this town has really sort of doubled down on this. My colleague at the Daily Star, Jacob Boswell, had a really great front page story the other day where he spoke to the mayor, and the mayor said, "Oh no, I think this is a good thing, not really a problem." He also called up a couple of resort owners who were very vocally enthusiastic about this ban of Syrians.
Do you want to read the quote, Ben?
Go ahead.
So one of the resort's owners, he said, "On your right side of the road, you have the sidewalk. If you go during the afternoon, you see women, children, and men. It's nice. But when Syrians are there, it's not nice." Yeah, I mean, it can't get worse. Racism can't be more normalized. This is incredible. And the mayor himself, when they asked him, when the reporter asked him about this, he said, "Yeah, but they can still travel by vehicle, but they just can't be walking around." Like, are we just banning humans for being Syrians from being present? And we just don't want people to see that they exist.
Right.
So that maybe if they pass by vehicles, there will be less chance for you to actually see them.
Right. And the mayor, these are the mayor's words, but the banner that announces the ban doesn't make this distinction. But yeah, bottom line, if you're planning on going to Faraya, you might, think twice about where you're going to be staying.
Yeah, and whether you will be going to Faraya or not at all, because a lot of people are calling for boycotting the resorts there and just the area to put pressure on the municipality because of how outrageous this is. We'll see what happens, but I think this will be a short-lived outrage. Usually this is what happens because political forces really are totally okay with this.
Oh, yeah. Moving on to another light subject, homophobia. We finally have Grindr banned in Lebanon. You remember back in January, there was like this weird partial ban where we really didn't know what was going on. But finally, we found out, not this past Friday, but the Friday before, the Ministry of Telecommunications issued an order to ISPs, ban Grindr.com and this associated IP address. So it's there. I checked right before we went on the air here. We're recording this on Saturday. And it seemed, at least over MTC Touch, that I was still able to see text, right, and see messages and stuff like that, but I just couldn't see pictures and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure exactly. And I've heard of other people experiencing the exact same thing. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on here. But bottom line, the order is in place, and we've seen it. So things are going to depend on how quickly this is implemented. And whether the order actually covers all of Grindr, this one IP address. Maybe they have multiple IP addresses. Maybe they use other IP addresses, one IP address for certain things and, for certain modes of communication and another IP address for other modes of communication. So it depends on those two things whether Grindr is actually going to be banned. There's still also a couple of important unanswered questions here. One is that we still don't know the legal basis of the order. And I am sort of at a loss as to what that might be. But we do know that two of the country's top prosecutors, these are prosecutors at the Court of Cassation, which is like the highest court in the country, two of the prosecutors there are involved in this, right? So I don't know why such high-powered prosecutors are involved in this, but Marie Abu Murad and Ahmed Kabalan are both involved in making this. It wasn't just the Ministry of Telecommunications, right? Like they were acting on orders from judges, and both of these judges were involved.
Because obviously this is the biggest national security threat to Lebanon, and no, it was so funny reading the reason that they stated for this decision, which is that they discovered that gay and bisexual people were using this app for connection, to hook up or to hang out or whatever, and they were like shocked to discover this. Apparently, I mean, that's basically the application. That's what it's made for. The fuck, guys?
Yeah. It's really bizarre.
And it's good to mention that there's no legal basis for banning gay people or bisexuality in Lebanon, right? We talked about it in the LGBTQ episode, and there's nothing illegal about being gay. There's something that might be used in certain cases against gay sex, but there's nothing called like it's illegal to be gay or bisexual.
Yeah. And here, like, this really highlights, I think, a few important things that you're touching on here. Like, on the one hand, we have the case, it really sort of encapsulates this nexus of overly powerful security institutions and then the judiciary, which doesn't really seem to be too mindful of transparency or really explaining, like, what is the basis for this, or, where does this order come from? That's one thing that I think is an important thing to highlight here. Another thing is just like, this is, it's a setback for freedom of expression.
Mm-hmm.
Thirdly, of course, this is another like punch down action taken specifically against the LGBTIQ community here in Lebanon.
And in general, there's just no good excuse for the state to be interfering in this.
And it's also kind of useless. Like, okay, even if you do this, then everybody can just either use a VPN or you can simply switch to like, there's a million other apps that you can switch to.
Yeah, we can have a special episodes about that.
Yeah. It's pointless.
As you're saying, it's pointless.
It's pointless other than to like demonstrate that like, oh, we're still against gays.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
We also had a really big event happen. The passing of sort of like this really huge name in Lebanese politics and in Lebanon in general. The former Maronite patriarch, the one before the current patriarch, Nasrallah Sfer, died while we were away. And he died just, a few days before turning 99. He was a really big figure. He was appointed patriarch, I think, in 86, so like in the middle of the Civil War. And he was patriarch through all the 90s and the early 2000s, through the assassination of Rafiq Hariri, through the leaving of Syrian forces from Lebanon, but before he finally stepped down in 2011. He was sort of like larger than life in this respect. He was just there for so long in this extraordinarily important position in Lebanon.
Yeah, and he was a controversial political figure at certain points at the end of the Civil War. But in general, he's being praised for opposing the Syrian occupation of Lebanon and for taking some political stances. And specifically, the LF the Lebanese forces were the most interested in investing in this moment, with like flags that have the LF's logo and Sphere's face, or other banners, etc., that focus on him standing for sovereignty and independence, in a reference to him standing against the occupation of the Syrian regime and against Hezbollah in his last decade being a patriarch. So in general, like, we didn't see, although he was a controversial figure at many points in history, we didn't see anyone making critical comments about it. Everyone was in Kirki, everyone was paying the respect from across the political spectrum.
Right. Even if people disagreed with certain things or disliked him, even time and place, right? Nobody really came out and said any of that stuff, with one notable exception, right?
Yeah, one person was slightly less intelligent in his comments, in his reaction. The head of the General Confederation of Lebanese Workers, Bashar al-Asmar, which is supposed to be this, body combining a lot of unions and federations. It's completely co-opted by the ruling class. It's ineffective, etc. But it doesn't matter. Still a major figure because of all the protests and strikes happening lately. And he made a self-deprecating joke about praying all night for Sfair, who might become a saint now. There's discussions about that, so that he bring back Asmar's hair because he's bald, and his erection, his ability to have an erection. It was absolutely like stupid, and the fact
was self-deprecating to Asmar. Like Asmar said it, like Asmar called himself bald and impotent, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, he said it on a stage before giving like a press conference along other people from the JCLW, and he said it while having 4 microphones in front of his face. I mean, really, it could not be more stupid. And someone told him, after he said the joke, someone told him, be careful, maybe one of the mics is on. And this is how the video ends, with these men laughing about it. Anyway, it caused wide outrage because, we can't handle a bad joke in Lebanon. And politicians were, inciting against him. Gibran Bassil tweeted saying, like, he should be, we should make an example out of this guy so that no one, crosses the boundaries of human dignity, etc. Or especially, Christian politicians were excited to invest in this moment, to make it something like very, very outrageous. He was summoned and he was detained, actually, for a period of 10 days. And he was forced to resign as head of the Confederation, which was, like kind of so immediate. It was absolutely surreal. Like, just within a couple of days, I think within 24 hours of his detention, he just resigned at the head of the Confederation, and many federations and unions were like kind of halting their participation in the Confederation until he steps down, etc. So it became kind of a scene of, national panic about this one little comment made by this guy, while the whole country was like literally boiling because of the budget discussions and everything.
Right. And this was brought up by a lot of people as well, that, this issue, like, he's being charged with these things that really seem to be outside of the scope. It wasn't just defamation, it was attacking a religious ritual or something like that, which is sort of like this bizarre twisting of the law, essentially so that they could bring more charges against him, or have harsher punishment for him. Right, which is just a total perversion of justice.
Yeah.
Regardless, if the comment was stupid, it was a dumb thing to say, especially with cameras and mics and everything like that around you. But at the same time, you look at what happened afterwards, and like, are you fucking kidding me? That's absolutely ridiculous. We should mention as well that those who laughed at the joke also got investigated. We're not sure if charges are going to be brought or anything, but Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah. Are we going to put people in jail for laughing at a joke now? I mean, it can get worse, can it? And also we had another issue related to freedom of expression and the crackdown on it, with Fida Aitani, the journalist, being sentenced to a total of 22 months in prison, and being forced to pay around $50,000 in fines and penalties for a Facebook post. Just one Facebook post where he hints at many things, but he insults the president, like not really insulting him, but just implying something bad about him, and then also Foreign Minister Gibran Bassil, and that's what he got, 22 months in jail.
Yeah, there's this really weird thing in Lebanese politics. You would think, like, if you're coming from like an American mindset, for instance, like, these politicians, they're really thin-skinned. They can't take anything. Everything goes to, like, they will bring charges, or that somebody who is their supporter will bring charges against them at the drop of a hat, against anybody who defames or comes close to defaming them. But that's just sort of like how the game is played here. And if you don't do that, if you don't play the game, then I guess you're seen as weak, or you're not pressing your advantage. You're not using all the laws to your advantage, and that could cost you in the long term. It's a weird system the way it's set up.
Yeah, but it's clear that our post Cedar Revolution political class is not very interested in freedom of expression anymore. I mean, they
anymore.
I mean, after romanticizing freedom of expression while having this campaign against the Syrian regime and their patronage over Lebanon, now they're not that, excited about the topic anymore, it seems,
and meanwhile, we had a very different judicial outcome just this past week, actually, but it grew out of something posted on Twitter originally.
Yeah, so last week the military court had the final session for the case of Suzanne Hashbesh and Eli Gabash, who were charged for their involvement in the fabrication of evidence against the actor Ziad Aitani. And what happened is that Suzanne Habesh was acquitted from the charge of fabricating the evidence, while Eli Gabash was indicted. But let's look at what really happened, because the original story was that Habesh coordinated with Gabash to create evidence that, implied that Aitani was being involved in some kind of treason by, being in touch with people with Israeli IP addresses or related to the Israeli intelligence on Facebook, etc. And this whole case, this whole initiative started as a punishment for a person called Ziad Aitani for sharing a screenshot of Al-Hajj liking a tweet on Twitter that was basically a joke about Saudi women not being able to or not being allowed to drive cars unless they are car bombs, like rigged cars. This was a joke shared by a Lebanese comedian who is not a funny person at all, obviously.
Clearly, yeah.
And the Hubaysh, Suzanne Al-Hajj Hubaysh liked the tweet, and someone took a screenshot of that, and this is when she was kind of resigned from being the head of the Cybercrime Bureau. So she was kind of taking revenge against this action. This is the story that we understood, yeah? This is all like what we allegedly understood from all the media coverage and also from the case of the prosecutor back then, 1 year ago. And then there were voice notes that were clearly indicating some kind of cooperation between the two and coordination. So the voice messages, which were leaked by LBCI, the TV channel, a few days ago, they showed some clear signs of coordination between the two on the actions being done against Ziad Aitani. And they showed, first of all, that there was a confusion and there was a discussion about who is the Ziad Aitani we're talking about between Gabash and Hubaysh, because they were discussing, is it this person, that person, because they look the same although they look different, etc. But anyway, the issue was that one of these two Ziad Aitanis was the one who posted the screenshot that made Hubaysh very furious. But also Gabash was kind of giving her all the updates on what they're doing. We prepared the fake Facebook accounts. We will add him now and we will send him a link. And he praised how fast things went when Ziad Aitani was suddenly, arrested within 2 days. He was just arrested by state security. In what Peter Germanus, the government commissioner to the military court, described as a race between security agencies. So state security were so excited to take on this case because they thought that he was actually an Israeli spy, and they wanted to take on the case before anyone else does, meaning the internal security forces, of course. And even Hajj, in her voice messages to Gabash, she asks him, did any of the guys, meaning probably the state security people who were detaining Ziad Aitani, did any of them ask him why he took the screenshot or who he sent it to or why he did it in the first place and what he has against me or whatever? So it was clear that this was the motivation behind everything. And although these were released to the public and although these were evidence inside the case and being presented to the court before, they were completely disregarded. They just magically, the court did not consider any of this in its last session. And Aitani was not present because of some military court rules, although he was a victim who spent 109 days, I think, in detention. And he told us that he was kind of tortured really bad during this time. Despite all of this, he was not present in the session. And the prosecutor, Peter Germanus, who was supposed to be making a case against these people who did this crime of, fabricating evidence, was the big surprise of the day, because he, instead of actually making the case against them as a prosecutor, he said, no, Hubaysh is innocent, should not commit any crimes, but Gabash is the one who has been committing these kind of hacking crimes against many people, and he takes this fabricating of evidence thing very easily. So Peter Germanus said Hubaysh shouldn't even be charged with ignoring a crime being committed that she knows of.
An incredible thing for the prosecutor to be saying.
Yeah, really strange. A lot of question marks about that. And the court's committee, which is 5 people, not all of them judges, it includes military officers mainly, they decided to acquit Hubaysh from the charge of conspiring to fabricate the evidence, but they indicted her through Article 399 of the Penal Code, which says if you are an employee and you witness a crime being committed and you don't report it to the authorities, then you get to be punished. But she was only indicted for 2 months and the penalty of $133, which everyone in Lebanon is joking about now, and 2 months in jail, which she had already spent during the detention, because she spent almost 1 year in detention. So she's out, she's released. And Ghabash was indicted with fabricating the evidence. 3 years of hard labor were just reduced to 1 year, and he already spent 1 year in detention, so he's out as well. So basically, one person was the victim of this weird, strange kind of spontaneous conspiracy, and then spent 109 days in detention and went through all of the things he went through, and his reputation was completely destroyed. He lost a lot of friends, etc. And then this was not taken into consideration at all by the court as like the result of this action. And what we have is 2 people going free.
Yeah. And the other thing to note here is that we said who this person is, Suzanne Al-Haj Habesh. And what a lot of people see here is that last part, Habesh. She is married to the brother of a very, very prominent MP, very, very high-powered lawyer, Hadi Habesh. She's married to his brother. And so whether or not this is the case, what people see is potentially, there was some political deal done here.
Yeah. Let's just say a lot of people think this is a scandal. There's a lot of uproar against it in terms of on social media and on different kind of media channels. And we have a protest actually scheduled for Monday at 5:30 in front of the military court against this decision, calling for another trial, and also against, not only political interference, but also the military court dealing with the civilian issues, as well as the kind of the crackdown on freedom of speech. And because freedom of speech is the heart of this whole thing, why posting a screenshot on a social media site can cause this whole conspiracy is something like it's just unbelievable.
Very quickly, on another note, I want to mention David Satterfield, who is the acting Assistant Secretary of State in the U.S. for Near Eastern Affairs. He's been doing this shuttle diplomacy between Lebanon and Israel, basically trying to get the two sides to come together to have negotiations over the border, the land border, but probably more importantly, the maritime border, because everybody is exploring for oil and gas out there. So this is an ongoing thing. There's a lot of rumors flying around. We don't know whether anything's going to actually come of it, but if something does come of it, and there seems to be quite a bit of momentum, he's gone back and forth a few times now. If something does come of this, that would be really huge. But on to things that we actually know about. My latest favorite topic, the budget, was passed. It was passed by cabinet. It still has to go through parliament, but cabinet, they met like 20 sessions over the past month. And we actually have a document. There's something that is leaked that I've seen that we think is the actual 1,000+ page document of everything. So we've got stuff, and most of the stuff is what we thought it was. We've spoken a lot about the budget previously on this program, so we're not going to go super in depth with this. But I do want to run through a few numbers and then make a couple of points about this really quickly. So the total budget this year is 23.3 trillion lira, about $16 billion. And that's down from the 2018 document, about $360 million. Not a whole lot, right? On the face of it, it's only like a 0.6% cut in terms of GDP. And the deficit is only like $2.8 billion, which is like south of 5% of GDP. Amazing, right?
Yeah.
Well, theoretically, yeah, but all of these numbers are fiction. It's all a big lie. In 2018, the estimated deficit was really 11.5% of GDP. And side note, the finance ministry still has not released figures for December. We don't know. This is the latest they've ever released them. They're usually released in March. It is now June, and the finance ministry is still fucking sitting on the figures.
Total coincidence.
I'm sure. If it's 11.5% of GDP, which is the number that they're talking about, what the budget deficit was last year, that comes out to about $6.5 billion. And so comparing anything to the actual 2018 budget document is really farcical. And then there's also reason to believe, I would argue, that this year's budget document is largely fiction as well. The big thing that's not in it is EDL, transfers to EDL. Well, it's sort of included. It's not included where it should be. The line item that it should be is still zero. There is no line item where EDL transfers should be in the budget. But on one of the summary pages of the budget, it includes like a partial number for EDL that's outside of that 23 trillion number that I just mentioned. But then you have to go, that partial number is only half of the real number. You have to go into the text to find the real number. And so if you do all of that, and they did this at the French newspaper, help me with the name.
L'Orient Le Jour.
Yes, your pronunciation is much more beautiful than mine is. If you do that, then this document actually authorizes an additional $1.6 billion in the budget. So if you add everything together, that $1.6 billion to the previous $2.8 billion, that was the original deficit, then you get to $4.4 billion, or about 7.6% of GDP, which is what they announced that they had cut the budget to. So that's how you get that. That is the math of how you get to this number that you see, like Jamal Jarrah coming out and saying, "Oh, the cabinet session, we cut the budget down to 7.59% or whatever he said." That's the math of how you get this. So that leads to an interesting question, though, because they basically cut $2 billion from the deficit. In 2018, the deficit was something like $6.5 billion, and it went down to $4.45 billion. So where did that $2 billion come from? And it's kind of hard to see because the numbers are super similar to the 2008 budget. So we have to look at the policies, the new policies that are introduced in the 2019 budget, and decide if they're like really going to support the numbers that they're expecting to see. And we've been through most of these before on this show. A friend of the show, Jeremy Arbid, has a nice Twitter thread on the main measures here. Of several things were added, and I think he based that off of work from Bank Biblos. But basically, we have to divide things into like measures that will have an impact and measures that maybe won't have an impact. And I think there are a few like sort of obvious calls, cutting military retiree salaries by 3%, for instance. Like that's something that if it passes, if it makes it through Parliament, that will have an effect because that's something the state can do very easily and will do if the law supports it, right?
Yeah.
Capping salaries at 12 salaries per year instead of 13, 14, 15, 16 salaries per year as some people were getting. It's effectively a pay cut. If it passes, it will have an effect on the bottom line. But then other measures strike me as a little bit more like magical thinking, things like extra customs fees, random stuff like they've this really bizarre shisha tax. Like every head of argile, you have to pay a thou on, like 66 cents on, which is just ridiculous. That will never make the state any like I don't see how that's enforceable in any way whatsoever.
I mean, if the restaurants were not enforcing the smoking ban, do you think they will enforce a fee on every single argile head? It's just
yeah. And
ridiculous.
If you think that there are a million ways around. If you're not controlling it at the restaurant, then you're trying to control it at like the warehouse level, like the distributor level. That's also hugely problem. Like there's no way that you're going to be making as much money as you should be making. This is just an impossible tax to really implement.
And I really want to know who suggested it. I really want to know who's this guy who came up with this brilliant idea that this is the most taxable thing. And in a country where we have so much tax evasion, this is the tax that we can make sure we collect fully.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah. So at least for me, the jury's still out on the 2019 budget. But I definitely don't believe everything that I read. I think that there is quite a bit of it that is fictitious, and there's quite a bit of it that's magical thinking, I think. But I'm not sure how that plays out in the actual like bottom line dollar numbers. I really don't know. And that's the big question, I think.
I think that's a really important point you're making. And another one that we will probably be able to elaborate more on in the future is how much money is being taken from each source, because some little measures sometimes they turn out to be actually pretty significant for people with low incomes. So we have to see what we have of analysis. And when we look at the numbers more closely, because it's such a huge document as well, maybe we can offer more insight about this in future episodes.
One other thing that bears on this is the hiring freeze. Basically, one thing in the budget that seems like it's going to pass is sort of like doubling down on the hiring freeze. that was introduced originally in August of 2017. Very quickly, we know that this measure has not really been watertight either, right? And that's because Ibrahim Khan and the rest of the Finance and Budget Committee in Parliament, they held all of these hearings earlier this year on this, made this huge report, and they finally submitted it to Nabi Berri and the Court of Audit. And Ibrahim Khan came out and said 37,022 state employees were not employed in the legal manner. Basically, somehow they went around the normal hiring process, or they're not employed in the right, like an illegal category or a category that exists in Lebanese law. And connected to that, 32,000 of those were before the hiring freeze came into effect in August 2017, but 5,000 were after that. And so we have it's a very leaky ban on the hiring.
And about this specifically, after August 2017, when the ban was passed, we had few months before, 8 months before the elections, right?
Exactly.
The elections that were postponed many times. So 5,000 people were employed due to political connections, mostly ahead of the elections. I wonder what that counts as.
Yeah. And so the effect on the bottom line, you might say, oh, well, because of that, it's not really going to have an effect on the bottom line. But the fact that they are actually looking into this stuff and they've done this report, and they filed a report, and now even we have some charges being filed. This past week, a prosecutor at the Court of Audit sued 3 state employees, including the boss of Ojero, Imad Krediye, basically for the violations, for these hiring violations, and also ordered a halt to the salaries of 462 state employees, most of them at Ojero. And this all just happened on Friday. So we're expecting more of these kinds of actions to happen. So it's possible that the hiring freeze could be getting some teeth. And so maybe this part of the budget, that says, oh, well, we're not hiring any new state employees, maybe that actually will be more effective than the previous version, the August 2017 hiring freeze.
And one last thing that has been happening throughout the last few weeks is the protests, right? We've had many protests by military veterans, by Lebanese university teachers and students who are protesting now against cuts to the Lebanese university budget, which is also incredible. Like the fact that they are cutting the university budget while we only have this one public university, and all private universities are raising their tuition, becoming completely not affordable for the majority of the population. So students and teachers are kind of taking actions together for this. At the same time, because the teachers have gone on strike, the teachers that are fixed employees and in the state are going on strike, students are in a bit of a difficult situation because they're worried about the academic year, etc. But we had a lot of other protests as well by military veterans, as mentioned, and some of those escalated into kind of scuffles with the security forces, or them trying to go closer to the Sarai, etc. We had a short-lived strike by central bank employees who were protesting against cutting a quarter of the salaries, because this rule that you can't get more than 12 salaries. In their case, they get 16, which doesn't mean that they are rich or anything, because the salaries might be modest. At the same time, they get 16 of those, but they will lose a quarter of them if a decision like that happens. So they held the strike for a few days. And then that's why the stock market stopped for one day.
Ooh.
Yeah, big stock market we have. And then the General Confederation of Lebanese Workers that we mentioned also went on strike, but it's not very effective. You could not really see the strike, but a few institutions were abiding by it.
Yeah, there were a lot of just various strikes going on over the past month or so. And this is something that I'm not sure how effective all of these things were. I need to do a much closer reading of the budget document. It doesn't seem to me that everybody really got what they wanted. But for sure, this means that we're going to see continued action as the draft budget goes to Parliament.
Yeah, I think this is a time for a lot of us to absorb what happened and go into the details of the budget, and then reveal the controversial things about it, right? The students of the Lebanese University have already done that by stating that the budget for the university is much lower, $27 million, I think, lower than last year. But a lot of other people with interests will have to do the same within the next couple of weeks and raise their objections, because we will see, deliberation in parliament. We will obviously see some populist MPs who are trying to portray themselves as anti-establishment, like Jamil Sayed, or probably Kataib as well, who are not in the government, or Paula Yaubian. They will be talking about the budget in critical terms, so this will fuel more discussions. But I think, bottom line is, we don't know if they were effective, these protests, but we know that they might have been effective in preventing harsher measures. I think that the kind of situation that they created in the country, especially the military veterans being very active during this time, and politicians trying to say, yeah, actually we support them, we shouldn't cut anything from the salaries or whatever, and just the situation of people being very angry before anything really dramatic is decided. It was kind of preventive action in a lot of cases. I think this was kind of a balancing factor, because otherwise I would have expected some increase of VAT or some gasoline tax or other horrible things that we talked about before,
Right.
that would have had a very regressive outcome.
Right. And just to give everybody an idea of what's going to be going on the ground, on Monday, the Finance and Budget Committee is scheduled to open up its first hearing into the budget. And then we have Eid next week. They'll have a break for Eid, and then after Eid come back. And basically the idea is they will be most likely having one or two sessions even every day until they finish things. They did this last year because the budget was being rushed through to finish before the Paris 4 conference. And it took, I believe, about 2 weeks for the Finance and Budget Committee to finish everything, doing these just like packed schedules, like really, going through everything in a very, very, like you got the national defense budget, you've got one session to look at all of it,
Yeah.
But they did it last year. It seems as though they're probably going to do that again this year. And so we're looking at them being finished probably in a couple of weeks. And then at some point after that, Nabi Berri will call a General Assembly of Parliament, and that'll be probably 2 or 3 days long. And then at the end of that, they will go through and vote article by article. That's how you're supposed to do it for the budget. Vote article by article, and probably pass everything, and everything will be wrapped up before the end of this month.
And that's the budget for 2019, just to make sure all our listeners are aware.
This is supposed to be done by the end of December. Yeah.
So they're planning what to spend in the last 5 months.
Yeah. But yeah, clearly this is also something that we will be taking a closer look at as well over the next few episodes. We'll be covering this in depth for you all. And I don't know, I have a feeling things could get exciting with protests and stuff.
Yeah, maybe we'll see some protests, and maybe there's still an opportunity for the next few weeks, to talk more and more about the economy as to keep it in public discourse and talk about it in a critical manner. So it's still an opportunity, I think, for kind of political organizing and mobilization. Let's see what happens.
And of course, we'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, I'm Benjamin Red.
I'm Nizar Hassan.
And this has been the Lebanese Politics Podcast.
Lebanese Politics Podcast is brought to you by myself, Nizar Hassan, Benjamin Red, produced behind the scenes by Susan Wilson, and the music is by Omar El Fil.